Due to the COVID isolation worldwide, I'm offering my few followers the opportunity of listening to a 15-minute podcast. This one is about westerns. I'm going to have a look at 5 which I think might well represent the genre and could be a watch for people who usually keep away from them. The first is The Magnificent Seven from 1960. By 1960, the Western as a genre was on its deathbed. After a couple of decades of almost constant production, usually involving taciturn men on horseback and ladies with very pointy breasts. So it was something of a coincidence that the 7 of the title were gunslingers who had fallen on hard times and who were hired by a Mexican village for little more than 3 meals a day to protect them from the predations of a gang of bandits. The first act, getting the band together, is wonderful stuff as Chris, played by Yul Brynner, collects the team, seldom equalled and never bettered. And the 7, 6 old hands and 1 newbie, go down to the village where they are soon required to take on the bandit gang. The gang capture them, but the leader lets them go, figuring that they are just hired guns who will go home. Do they? No. They return to the village, this time determined to win, hence allowing the drama to play out. I first saw this movie when it was on general release, actually in a cinema in Falkirk, and I've seen it on a number of occasions since. It is memorable for its theme tune, which surely everybody would recognise, even if they can't relate it to a film. And also one of the best tracking shots ever. The camera paces alongside the bandit chief as he gallops on his horse through the back gardens of the Mexican homesteads, jumping the boundaries. You only have to wonder later how the hell they managed it. Also, it is said that Steve McQueen did not get on with Yul Brynner, upstaging him as much as possible. Brynner apparently used to build a small mound of earth on the spot where he was due to stand, so he looked taller than the others, which McQueen would demolish if he could. It is not a perfect film, and the constant rewrites on the set do show. But don't be attracted to the 2017 remake. It is not nearly as good. The second film is The Wild Bunch from 1969. In the cinematic timeline, we have moved on to 1913. There are cars about in the West, and there are still hold-ups of banks and trains. A gang led by Pike, played by William Holden, a war veteran of some sort, raids a bank in a small town. But unbeknown to them, it is a trap, and on the rooftops are a bunch of bounty hunters awaiting them. There is a shootout, and some of the gang get away, mainly by abandoning a young man who is a bit intellectually challenged, more or less as a decoy. They are chased by the bounty hunters into Mexico, ending up robbing an armament train for a renegade general. One of the gang is a Mexican, and they give some of the arms to his village, an act which is in the end to result in their downfall. The gang are not good guys, but the bounty hunters are even worse, and it is possible that the Mexican general is the worst of all. In order to delay the pursuit by the bounty hunters, the gang put explosive charges in the supports for a river bridge and at the appropriate moment blow it up. Don't miss it. 4 stuntmen were paid a lot of money to sit on their horses and be plunged into the river. It is not known what the horses got. The first scene was originally 25 minutes long, but the director, Stan Peckinpah, cut it to 5 minutes in the end as part of a session of editing in Mexico, which lasted for several months. In my reviews, I usually try to tell people about the content, and while this film is very violent and was nearly banned after being made, we would probably not think much about it today. On the other hand, There was some carousing for which the prostitutes from the local brothel were hired. That might raise an eyebrow now. The third film is Pale Rider from 1985. There are a lot of Clint Eastwood westerns out there after he took the job as the man with no name. And apparently there are those who think The Good and the Bad and the Ugly is the best western ever made. But for this podcast I've had to choose only one Eastwood western, and I would recommend Pale Rider. I don't think we actually know when it is set, but we would guess sometime around 1850, towards the end of the Californian gold rush. Somewhere in the state there is a tent village from which prospectors sally forth and pant for gold in the local stream. But further upriver there is a commercial operation which is strip mining the hillside with water jets, and the bots wants rid of the pesky prospectors. So he sends his minions along to stir things up, killing a small dog owned by a young woman. Subsequently, she prays for deliverance, and coincidentally, a man with no name, who the prospectors call the preacher, turns up. The girl and her mum both fall for him, and the prospectors appreciate his help in keeping the thugs at bay. But he leaves suddenly to their distress. We know that he has gone to a bank to recover his revolver, and when the financier who is bankrolling the strip mining hires a group of deputies with murder on their mind, we are set for a big finish. This film is seen by many as the last of the Man with No Name films, and he is only called the preacher because he turns up wearing a dog collar. Pale Rider is described in the book of Revelations as death, but what or who he is left up to us. Clint Eastwood has not always got it right as a director, but this time he did, and the film is well worth watching even if you are not a Western fan. We move on to Django Unchained from 2012. The 19th century is a fertile period in American history which has allowed writers to reimagine historical events from those days and expand the possibilities of what could be done by a man with a gun. We might consider the eras to be before the Civil War, during the Civil War and after the Civil War, before the motor car became the chosen mode of transport rather than the horse. Django Unchained is set before the Civil War, when slaves were still bought and sold in the South. A bounty hunter, who is on the track of some worthwhile villains, buys the freedom of a slave who could recognize them, and after a couple of gunfights and some fun dressing up, the duo go out on the trail of the Brittle brothers, and Schultz, the German bounty hunter, agrees to help Django, the slave he purchased, to find his wife, Brunhilde, who is a house slave and who was being sold separately. They find the villains and, as become customary, kill them, and then set out to get the Brunhilde back, engaging in some trickery to try and buy her from the evil plantation owner, Calvin, for little money. But when the plan goes awry, things go downhill, and it will take more than a few dollars to get Brunhilde back. This film is said to be Quentin Tarantino's tribute to the spaghetti western. It goes on for 2 hours and 45 minutes, but is worthwhile, and Christopher Waltz was a surprising choice for the bounty hunter. And it is said in this story to be a German dentist. This combination of skills was apparently not that unusual back in those days. It won the original screenplay, and Christopher Waltz won the Best Supporting Actor at the 2013 Oscars. But don't let this put you off. There's some typical Tarantino stuff, some of which is a bit wearing, but once more, well worth a view, even if you're not a Western fan. Lastly, we move on to The Sisters Brothers from 2018. And let's get some stuff out of the way. This film was not a financial success. One of the critics who liked it said that the sisters brothers were just smart enough to know that they should be smarter. The brothers, played by John C. Reilly and Joaquin Phoenix, are assassins and are hired by a businessman known as the Commodore to track down and kill a private detective, himself set on the trail of a man who is said to have developed a chemical to lode gold in the rivers of California during the gold rush. One of the brothers, Eli, wants to retire, but the other, Charlie, is determined to go on killing people, as well as getting so drunk that he falls off his horse in the mornings. Eli feels a loyalty towards Charlie, who saved him from abuse by their alcoholic father by killing him. The brothers are themselves hunted down by a variety of gunmen sent after them by the Commodore and others, and they survive by killing everybody who threatens them, mostly, it seems to me, although it is never mentioned, by having more guns about their persons than the people who come after them. The revolvers use cap and ball ammunition, so take a long time to load. So the more guns you have, the more likely you are to survive. For those of us who are familiar with the Spanish countryside, it is obviously the location for this outing, once more fulfilling the task of being the Wild West. But the film is none the worse for that, so if you fancy a slightly odd western, this could be for you. So that's all for this podcast. Just a reminder, the recommended films are The Magnificent Seven from 1960, The Wild Bunch from 1969, Pale Rider from 1985, Django Unchained from 2012, and The Sisters Brothers from 2018. So thank you for listening. Goodbye for now, and keep safe in these difficult times.